Okay. Okay. Brilliant. Well, welcome everybody to our English Catholic History Association talk and also with the Australian Catholic Historical Society today. So I'm currently in Jersey in the Channel Islands at the moment, and we've got people participating from Britain, Australia, and who knows wherever else. If you want to say in the message in the box, in the dialogue box where you're from, that might be interesting to know actually what part of the world you're actually from at the moment. So our speaker today is Professor Jim Franklin, Vice President of the Australian Catholic Historical Society, who's going to speak on Archbishop Daniel Mannix's enforced stay in England, 1920. So that's enough from me. Over to John, I think.
Thank you, Tim. I'm delighted to introduce Professor James Franklin to this meeting. In addition to a distinguished teaching career in the School of Mathematics and Statistics at the University of New South Wales, Jim is well known for his contribution to scholarship in philosophy, ethics, the history of ideas, and aspects of Australian Catholicism. Now, from 1917 to 1963, Melbourne, Australia had an Irish-born Catholic archbishop, and his name was Daniel Mannix. Our speaker, Jim Franklin, is Vice President of the ACHS, as Tim has mentioned, also editor of the ACHS Journal. One of his several contributions to writing on Australian history is the 2015 book, The Real Archbishop Mannix, written in conjunction with Michael Gilchrist and Gerard Nolan. Today, Jim speaks to us about Mannix's enforced stay in England in 1920 at the behest of the imperial government, when Mannix was actually endeavouring to visit his native island. I warmly commend Jim's narrative to your attention.
Thank you, John. Well, let's go. Many thanks to all of you for coming. You'll remember a few weeks ago in the news that Greta Thunberg was on a ship approaching Gaza. Would she be allowed to land or wouldn't she? The blaze of publicity was huge. Now, imagine if instead of her, it had been a Catholic archbishop of some city with a large Arab population. That would have been big news as well. That gives an idea of the situation as Archbishop Mannix approached Ireland by ship in 1920. If you're thinking, look, it's not the business of a Catholic archbishop to stage political stunts like that, and surely the Vatican wouldn't like it, well, yes, and that was equally true in 1920. Nevertheless, that's exactly what happened. I'll start with the dramatic events in the middle of the story, then go back to explain the lead-up, then the sequel after Mannix has landed against his will in England. Now, at this stage, I'll share the screen. On the 31st of July 1920, the Baltic, one of the largest transatlantic liners, left New York bound for Queenstown in Ireland, now called Cove, and Liverpool. On board was Daniel Mannix, the Irish-born Archbishop of Melbourne. This is a picture from a slightly later voyage, but gives a good idea of what it was like on deck. Many thousands had seen him off at the dockside following a number of inflammatory Irish nationalist speeches he had made in the US. In one of them, he had told the Americans, England was your enemy. She is your enemy today. She will be your enemy for all time. The ship's cooks and stewards threatened to strike if it left with Mannix. The firemen, mainly Irish, threatened to strike if it didn't. It was presumed he would make more speeches in Ireland, along with visiting his aged mother, which was the claimed purpose of his visit. At this time, mid-1920, violence was increasing in the Irish War of Independence, with atrocities on both sides. So British authorities feared that Mannix in Ireland would make things worse. The British Cabinet included the Mannix problem on its agenda for the 2nd of August. Would he be allowed to land in Ireland and provoke trouble? The answer was no. This is the Cabinet minutes. Cabinet reaffirmed earlier decisions. In Part B, Mannix was to be informed by the captain of the Baltic that he would not be allowed to land in Ireland. After an uneventful crossing, the Baltic approached the southern coast of Ireland on August the 8th. Mannix's secretary, who was with him, Father Vaughan, recalled what happened. We were off Queenstown and could see the lights of the city. We could clearly distinguish the huge bonfires along the coast and on every hilltop, which admiring fellow countrymen had lit as a welcome home to Erin's great son and fearless patriot, the Archbishop of Melbourne. It was a never-to-be-forgotten sight. But my mind was too busy speculating to allow me to appreciate the scene. What is going to happen? Everyone was asking. Soon we had the answer. The Baltic was approached by a Royal Navy destroyer, HMS Wyvern, and ordered to stop. 2 naval officers and 2 detectives went on board, explained their business to the captain, and arrested Mannix and his secretary. Mannix formally refused to go, but then went quietly when the naval officer placed his hand on Mannix's soldier, indicating arrest. They were transferred to the Wyvern. A destroyer is much less pleasant to travel on than a liner, and Mannix suffered bad seasickness at the best of times. He and the secretary were dumped at Penzance, still accompanied by the detectives. They took an overnight train to Paddington Station, London, where the public wasn't allowed to meet him. Mannix fronted the press as soon as possible, and he said, "Since the Jutland battle, the British Navy has not scored a success comparable to the capture of the Archbishop of Melbourne, and not a single British sailor has lost his life. It has rendered the British government the laughing stock of the world." Some comment here from the Irish press. At this point, I'll stop the story and rewind so as to look at who Mannix was and why he was causing so much trouble. Then I'll resume the story with his arrival in London and look at what he did in England. Needless to say, it wasn't just saying masses and visiting the poor. Daniel Mannix was born in 1864 in Charleville in the centre of Ireland and grew up in reasonably comfortable circumstances. By the age of 50, he had had a conventionally successful ecclesiastical career, mainly as president of the leading Irish seminary, St Patrick's College, Maynooth. In this photo of 1911, later made much of by his enemies, he's pictured left, welcoming Queen Mary to the college, and there was no indication that he had any particularly strong political views. He had spoken once on land reform, but said nothing especially radical. He could have looked forward to an appointment to one of the leading sees in Ireland. Instead, in 1912, without being consulted, he was appointed coadjutor to Archbishop of Melbourne, with the expectation of soon succeeding the aged and unwell Archbishop. On the voyage out, it wasn't only his physical body that turned upside down, his thinking did too, for reasons still unknown. In Melbourne, he took aggressive leadership of Melbourne's mainly working class and mainly Irish Catholics and attempted without success to form a Catholic political party. During the First World War, Australia did not have conscription, and the government held 2 referendums in an effort to introduce it. Almost all the great and good of society supported the referendums, and Mannix was the highest profile opponent. Both referendums failed. Mannix did not initially support the Easter Rising in Ireland in 1916, nor did he explicitly oppose the war, but he was still seen by many as disloyal. Political activity of that direct kind is not the business of bishops, and he was unique among bishops in undertaking it. The Vatican repeatedly warned him against it, but he ignored them. We know that because years later he released the correspondence to his biographer, also a very unusual thing to do. By 1919, he was attacking capitalism as well and promoting workers' control of industry, and also Australian nationalism, with the implication that it was preferable to empire loyalty. That went over well in working class Melbourne. If in countries like France, the Catholic Church lost the working class, in Australia, the Catholic Church was the working class, or a good part of it, and their political arm, the Australian Labor Party, became heavily Catholic. The Vatican was well aware of Mannix's popularity among the masses, and hence the difficulty of sacking him or transferring him or disciplining him any other way. When the Australian Prime Minister Billy Hughes asked the Vatican to recall him, they replied that his popularity made that inadvisable. Mannix was also becoming more assertive about Irish nationalism as events in Ireland headed towards the Irish War of Independence. He headed a massive demonstration in Melbourne for St. Patrick's Day 1920, led by 14 Victoria Cross winners on white chargers and with thousands of men in uniform following. Then he departed for his visit to the Pope to report on his diocese. He travelled via the United States, which is the long way round, and announced he was planning to visit his mother in Ireland. In his progress across the country from San Francisco to New York, he gave increasingly aggressive nationalist speeches and was feted by huge numbers of Irish Americans. Here, he throws the first ball at the Yankees-White Sox baseball game, an indication of being a publicity genius. In Omaha, on his way across the United States, he met Eamon de Valera, a leader of the more extreme Republican wing of the Irish nationalist movement. The two found themselves deeply in tune with each other and remained so for decades, through the many ups and downs of de Valera's political fortunes. In New York, he said, "I'm going to Ireland soon, and I'm going to kneel on the graves of those men who in Easter week gave their lives for Ireland." To see the meaning of that from the British perspective, recall that the rebels of the 1916 Easter Rising were fighting on the side of the Kaiser just before the time of the First Battle of the Somme, which cost 100,000 British dead. Meanwhile, back in Australia, the Prime Minister, Billy Hughes, Mannix's old enemy from the conscription debates, gave a fiery speech about Mannix's activities in the United States. It includes this comment, which possibly has some contemporary relevance. "The hope of peace in this world lies not in the League of Nations, but in that firm alliance and understanding that has existed these last 100 years between America and the British Empire in the closer cooperation of the Anglo-Saxon races. The man, therefore, who seeks to make bad blood between America and the British Empire is criminal. And if we are to choose between the Kaiser and him as to who is the greater criminal, I know whom I should choose. The Kaiser was pushed into this, but Dr. Mannix went into it of his own free will." The Prince of Wales, who visited Australia about this time, wrote privately to Hughes to congratulate him, and added his hope that dear Mr. Hughes would not let such a horrid man return to Australia. While Mannix was giving his increasingly direct speeches across the United States, an interesting subplot was taking place behind the scenes in diplomatic channels between the British Foreign Office and the Holy See. The British believed that the Vatican ought to be restraining Mannix from giving political speeches. The Vatican agreed with that entirely, but they had experience of Mannix's ignoring their instructions 4 years earlier at the time of the conscription referendums. Temperatures went up when a rumour appeared in the press that when Mannix arrived in Ireland, he was to be appointed to succeed the aged Archbishop of Dublin. The British cabinet instructed their representative at the Vatican, Count de Sales, to make the strongest possible representations to prevent that and to threaten to break off diplomatic relations if it happened. De Sales did not think that was a good idea. He said you can only make that threat once, but he did see Cardinal Gaspari, the Secretary of State. Gaspari assured him, in effect, that there was no one less keen to appoint Mannix to Dublin than himself. He said there was no semblance of likelihood whatever in the rumour. He indicated the Vatican would not protest against Mannix's exclusion from Ireland, but they were not in a position to give him orders not to visit Ireland. So that allowed the British to proceed with forbidding Mannix's visit, give or take the public relations disaster likely to arise. Among the other new British measures to contain violence in Ireland was a special penalty of flogging imposed for the cutting of girls' hair and outrages against women. If you've seen the movie Ryan's Daughter, you'll remember about Irish women who fraternised with British soldiers. It shows the nature of the deteriorating security situation that Mannix was wading into, or rather trying to wade into. Very different from the Ireland he'd left in 1913. So then Mannix took ship for Ireland, as we saw, and ended up in London instead, courtesy of the might of the Royal Navy. So to resume the story after his arrival in London. In London, he stayed at Nazareth House, Hammersmith, and prepared in a very leisurely fashion to proceed to Rome to meet the Pope. Meanwhile, he was available to give speeches in the Irish nationalist cause. Lloyd George offered to bring his mother from Ireland, but Mannix refused. As she was 89, that was probably not a feasible idea. An issue very soon blew up that was a perfect fit for Mannix's agitation. Terence McSweeney, an Irish nationalist, had been elected as Mayor of Cork in succession to a Lord Mayor assassinated by the police. He was arrested for possessing seditious literature and a police cipher key and transferred to Brixton Prison in London. There he went on hunger strike and died after 74 days. As in later times, a hunger strike provoked massive angst on an international scale. Mannix was among those who visited him in prison to show support. Mannix's background as a former professor of moral theology also came in useful to explain why dying of a hunger strike does not count as suicide, which is forbidden under Catholic morality. Mannix was prominent on the left there at the funeral of McSweeney in St George's Cathedral, Southwark, and led the procession in which the body was taken to Euston Station for transfer to Ireland. Mannix was forbidden from visiting the major British cities with Irish immigrant populations, Liverpool, Manchester and Glasgow. He did give speeches in many other places, including a tour of Edinburgh and other Scottish locations early in the new year 1921. His reception by British Catholics was mixed. He had a close ally in the Irish-born Bishop of Portsmouth, Dr. Cotter. Cardinal Bourne was plainly embarrassed. G.K. Chesterton rushed into print on his arrival, saying that his arrest was a gigantic farce, but also asking how could he stand in the pulpit and plead in support of murder and cold-blooded assassination. I'll tell next the story of what happened, a kind of sideshow of the whole thing, when he proposed to give a speech on the 5th of December 1920 in Bootle, which was marginally outside the area of Liverpool in which he is forbidden to speak, but only just outside. The Irish population of Liverpool could easily walk there to hear him. Archival documents show what happened behind the scenes. By this time, events in Ireland had raised tensions further. For example, some officers of the Lancashire Fusiliers had been assassinated in Dublin on the 21st of August. It wasn't only the Irish who took an interest in the planned speech. The police on Merseyside received a number of letters from Protestant associations, such as this one from the Grand Master of the Loyal Orange Lodge, Bootle. It says in the middle paragraph, "We are organising with the assistance of other bodies a monster demonstration in protest, and I feel as loyalists and in justice to you to write you of our intention not to allow a banned prelate of his known character to insult the loyalist population." Plainly, that is a threat of mob violence. Would the police defend Mannix's right of free speech, or would they cave into the threat? With a week to go to the event, the police panicked. The chief constables of Lancashire, Liverpool and nearby areas met and begged London to ban Mannix from the whole region. Well, they got immediate action. Bureaucracies can move fast if they want to. The request went up to the top, the Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson, Chief of Imperial General Staff. With 4 days to go, he responded, banning Mannix from the whole area, all the requested areas. The speech did not take place. All right, now we turn to the aftermath of those events. Eventually, when he arrived in Rome, Mannix did meet Pope Benedict XV in March and April 1921. He expected a rap over the knuckles, but he was pleasantly surprised. According to Mannix's account of the meeting, at the last of 3 meetings, the Pope said, "What do they think of me in Ireland?" The Archbishop thought this was the opening remark of a conversation which would end in his recall. But he replied, "Holy Father, the Irish people find it very strange that you seem to be against them, when for so many centuries they have been faithful to Rome." "But I am not against them," said the Pope. "I am for them." "Then, Holy Father," said the Archbishop, "you should write to let them know." "The Pope laughed at my impudence," said the Archbishop, "and then surprised me. You draft me a letter, and if I agree with it, I will sign it." We only have Mannix's word for that account of the meeting, but the letter as issued does seem to bear Mannix's imprint. It says of Ireland, "Unflinching even to the shedding of blood in her devotion to the ancient faith and in her reverence for the Holy See, she is subject today to the indignity of devastation and slaughter. On both sides, war resulting in the deaths of unarmed people, even of women and children, is carried on. We exhort English as well as Irish to calmly consider some means of mutual agreement." The British were livid to be condemned in the same terms as Irish terrorists. Lord Curzon, the Foreign Secretary, said, "Just the kind of casuistic performance that might have been expected from the Vatican." After Rome, Mannix returned briefly to London and was seen off by a large crowd of Irish at Victoria Station on the 16th of May 1921. He never saw England again. No doubt the pleasure was mutual. Finally, here's what happened to everyone in the story. Field Marshal Wilson was assassinated by the IRA on the doorstep of his London home in 1922. Benedict XV also died in 1922. It has been rumoured that he had named Mannix a cardinal, but died before announcing it, but there's no evidence of that. Mannix never did become a cardinal. He said himself, "If I had ever wanted to be a cardinal, I would certainly have charted my life differently," which is stating the obvious. The aged Ellen Mannix died in 1925 without seeing her son. She was reported as saying to her niece, "Poor Dan, if he'd been allowed to land in Ireland in 1920, he would have had a different point of view. He did not understand the situation in Ireland." Years later, a priest visiting Lourdes met the former captain of the Wyvern. He asked that a message be sent to Mannix. I would like him to know that of all the nasty jobs I ever had to do, there was none I disliked more heartily. Billy Hughes, like Mannix, outlived most of his contemporaries. Strangely, in later life, the two became friendly. It began when Mannix sent condolences on the death of Hughes's daughter. She died in London in 1937 after a caesarean section, aged 21. She wasn't married. It's just possible that a Catholic institution in England may have helped her or the surviving baby, but little is known about it. Mannix himself returned to Melbourne, where he remained as Archbishop until dying in 1963, aged 99 and a half. Pictured St. Patrick's Day again, 1954. He remained active in politics, including a visit to Ireland in 1925, where he supported the the Republican wing of the Nationalists, receiving Eamon de Valera in Melbourne in 1948, and participating in a massive split in the Australian Labor Party in 1955. For more on the topic, I recommend Jeff Kilday's video, are easily findable online, about Archbishop Mannix and the Royal Navy. Most of the material in this talk comes from the book that John mentioned at the beginning, The Real Archbishop Mannix, from the sources. It tries to write history in such a way that the reader is directly taken to the sources, with some commentary to make the sources understandable. The most detailed account of Mannix's stay in England is a chapter of Colm Kiernan's book, Mannix and Ireland. Okay, that is all. I'll stop. Back to me. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Questions?
Okay, excellent. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you very much. That fascinating talk. I didn't know anything about him before that, but I've learned quite a bit.
He'd be disappointed that you English people didn't know about him, but there you go.
No, I must admit I knew nothing at all about him. I mean, I know about the background of the conflict in Ireland,
Yeah.
to early 20s, and that's generally well known. But Archbishop Mannix, no, I'd never knew anything about him before. Nobody's ever talked about him. I hadn't read anything about him. He's definitely not well known at all. He may be in Ireland, of course. I mean, I don't know whether we've got any participants from Ireland today or not, but he may well be well known among Irish.
I think, in fact, he is. Perhaps Jeff Kilday can tell us something about that, about the profile of Mannix in Ireland, Australia versus England. If Jeff is still there, would you like to tell us something?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. What specifically did you want to know, Jim?
What about, is Mannix still well known in Ireland like he is in Australia?
Oh, I see. Well, I'm not sure about that. Val may be able to add to that one. I think less and less over the years, certainly.
Oh, okay.
What do you think, Val?
Yeah,
There's a problem of the whole, how much the younger generation are interested in the history of that era. But within those who take an interest in the era, he crops up for precisely the reason that Jim gave about him being different from all the other bishops in the world. I mean, I think he's the only one who really, during the War of Independence, at the time we're talking about, 1920, who was visibly and clearly supportive of the Republican side. Is that right, Jim?
yes, that is right.
And that just makes him, anybody who actually reads the history, that crops up, you know.
Yeah, but he was unique, not only in Irish terms, but bishops in other countries are not supposed to go on like that in the politics of their own areas either. They're supposed to call for peace and so on, but they're not supposed to literally get into the rough and tumble of politics and condemn this and found parties about that and so on.
Would you say that he was what we would call today radicalized by something or somebody?
Yes, most likely it was the single. If there was a single event, it was probably the British shooting the leaders of the Easter Rising, which created, well, many Irish of all persuasions were not happy with the Easter Rising, especially in the middle of the year, but then were even less happy about the British executing the leaders. That seemed to create a great deal of change and radicalise a great number of people, including Mannix.
Yeah,
And
it
then
certainly changed.
yeah, Jeff may be again able to talk about that.
Well, I think Val's written on this about how, in fact, it was perhaps a bit earlier than that with his mixing with working class Irish Catholics in West Melbourne that may have radicalised him even before the Easter Rising.
That's right. That's
Val?
that would be right. Yeah, Val has written an excellent article about Mannix's time as parish priest about West Melbourne. So in that sense, that perhaps radicalised him in the sense of leftist, Labour-oriented politics. From the specifically Irish issues, I would guess it was while Irish in Australia were in favour of supported home rule and, for example, Redmond's visit earlier, I wouldn't say they were particularly radical about Irish issues until after the Easter Rising. And only some of them then.
Was he a communist or was he just sort of a
No,
centre-left?
no, yeah, you would say mildly socialist left, aligned with the Australian Labor Party. So the Australian Labor Party claimed to be a socialist party, but in a very attenuated sense of socialist. And there's a short piece by Lenin, of all people, on the evils of the Australian Labor Party about how they might encourage the working class to think they can get reform from the capitalist system instead of being revolutionaries. And certainly Mannix was mildly socialist in that way. And when it came to a genuine communist threat in around 1920, Mannix says, well, you have to reform capitalism in order to make sure people don't fall for radical socialism and communism. And then in later life, he and his protege, B.A. Santa Maria, were very much in the lead of the anti-communist struggle in Australia.
Tim, apropos of his sort of background, he's preceded in supporting the Labor Party, which I think Jim's quite rightly said that supporters for a very moderate position, by a person called Cardinal Patrick Francis Moran, who was a Cullen nephew and a Cullen appointee to Sydney. And Moran in about 1900, Jeff, that's 903, I think the controversy crops up about Moran giving his support to the Labor Party at that time, but precisely for the reasons Jim's given, that Moran thought it was pretty moderate socialism that they were supporting. Is that right, Jim? Yeah.
Oh, that's exactly right. Yes. Moran, like Cardinal Manning, was in support of strikes in the 1890s. So Manning was a supporter of the workers in the dock strike in the 1890s, and Moran was similarly in favour. And they very much took up rerum novarum and talked about that in later life very much. So yes, you would say that Mannix, in that sense, was a successor of Cardinal Moran. So Cardinal Moran in the first half of in the first decade of the century was quite close to the Labor Party in Sydney, and as you may know, Australia had the first national Labor government in 1904, and Chris Watson, though he wasn't Catholic, was quite friendly with Cardinal Moran, and they discussed about how they'd negotiate the Catholic opposition to serious socialism, but Cardinal Moran would tell everybody to calm down and that the kind of socialism advocated by the Australian Labor Party was not something to frighten the horses, and the Catholics could quite safely join the Labor Party, which they did in droves, and a Catholic politician, Jim Scullin, who was to some degree a protege of Mannix, became Prime Minister of Australia in the Depression, which was much earlier than something like that could have happened in the United Kingdom or America.
Very interesting. I mean, he seems to have been quite a radical, as you say. The influences seem to be the sort of labour or socialist movement or trade union movement, possibly in Australia. Working class Catholics, particularly Irish Catholics, obviously influenced him, and some kind of Irish nationalism at some point seems to have influenced him. But of course, the question in some people's mind is, what was the attitude of the Irish clergy and Irish bishops towards the problems between Ireland and Britain? And prior to 1916, of course, most of the population of Ireland was not radical nationalist at all. As you quite rightly said, that the shooting of the execution of the 1916 rebels was a catalyst for change. It was a very, very, very unfortunate event. Had that not happened, things would have turned out very differently, almost certainly. But Nigel Parker, who's on our committee, CHA committee, says, do we know the attitude of the Irish bishops to the proposed visit of Cardinal Mannix?
Archbishop Mannix.
It was mixed. The Irish bishops were generally in favour of calming things down, but they were, well, Mannix was one of them, and at first they looked forward to him. By the time he arrived in 1925, he was an embarrassment and they didn't want anything to do with him. In 1920, it was a little more fluid, but maybe Val or Jeff can know some more about that. I'm not sure.
Well, 1925 was, as I say, it was a bit of an embarrassment because he was being, in Ireland, he was being feted by the Republicans. Now, of course, the Civil War had just come to an end a short while before he had arrived there. And most of the people in Ireland, in particular the hierarchy, were wanting to settle things down and to get on with the Free State government. When Mannix arrived, he, as I say, was being feted by the stop-outs, the anti-treaty Irish, and that meant that he was, in fact, in a sense, ostracised by the Irish bishops and by the Free State government, to the extent that when he left, he was so upset at the way he had been treated that he never wanted to return to Ireland, yeah, it was quite a sad end to that, because having been denied the opportunity to visit Ireland in 1920, he came back in 1925 hoping to be welcomed there, but he wasn't.
No, I think he would have been more welcomed by most in 1920, but then again, it might have depended what he said when he got off the boat. Hard to say.
It sounds like his views were regarded as quite extreme by some people in Ireland, because many Catholics, yes, as you say, wanted peace, especially after the Civil War. Of course, more people in Ireland died during the Civil War than they did during the time of the British occupation, 1960 to 1923.
That's right. So, of course, that wasn't foreseen in 1920.
No, it wasn't. But they didn't expect it to all implode, really, and then start fighting among themselves. And Britain stood back and watched it happen. Yeah, it was the whole thing was unfortunate. I've always found it very difficult to understand how Catholics can actually support murder as well. I've always found that difficult to actually understand, even in the context of Ireland and the situation. However, that's for Irish people to kind of
determine. Well, it is. So Mannix didn't literally support terrorism, but sometimes he gave the impression that he wasn't condemning it very enthusiastically.
Yeah.
Mannix was a little bit like Parnell. When both he and Parnell in America were far more outspoken and radical than they were at home. Now, that may have something to do with sedition laws in their own country as opposed to the United States. But Mannix, during his trip across America, became even, as he moved further from San Francisco across to New York, he became even more and more radical in his outspokenness. And Jim has quoted his famous statement at the Catholic summer school, where he said, "England is your enemy, has always been your enemy, and would always be your enemy."
all the time, yeah.
So, and Parnell was a bit the same. That when he gave his speech in Cincinnati, he was quite outspoken, outspokenly radical, and less so when he gave speeches in Ireland.
Yeah,
Parnell was fairly moderate.
Yeah, an American audience, of course, will wind most people up. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's the Irish American lobby, basically. I mean, there was trouble with them, of course, in the 1970s, 80s, and so on, supporting terrorism in Northern Ireland and not understanding the situation, or misunderstanding it, shall we say. Shall I just move on to another question? Timothy Fenwick says, could you say something about Mannix as a successor of Cardinal Moran, who he fitted into the struggles, how he's fitted into the struggles in the Australian church between the old Benedictines, Holding Vaughan, etc., and their defeat by the Irish in Australia?
Well, that, yeah, as we said something a bit about more in the connections between Mannix's views and Moran's. The Benedictine thing disappeared. The one with the death of Archbishop Vaughan and the succession of Cardinal Moran, was it 1878, something like that? The whole Benedictine thing suddenly disappeared. There were no what was left of them were pretty much cleaned out by Moran, and that the whole thing in Sydney and everywhere became wholly Irish. So virtually all the bishops from then on until about 1940 were Irish, either literally Irish or Irish Australian. Well, a couple of exceptions, but roughly speaking, it was an Irish church with Irish leadership, and the English aspect of the church had suddenly and completely disappeared.
Interesting. Are there any more questions anybody wants to ask at all? If you do, you can put them into the box now if you like.
Somebody asked about Carolyn Chisholm. Yeah, we had a talk about her. Yes, Carolyn Chisholm is well known in Australia. She was on the smallest denomination note for a while. She's not any longer. For some reason, we've gone back to having royalty. But during a somewhat more Republican phase, was it in the 90s or something, we had a $5 note with Carolyn Chisholm on her. On it. She is well known, and including both from Catholics and non-Catholics. She's not just known in Catholic circles. Her work in the 1840s for immigrant women in Sydney is regarded as one of a role model by feminists, for example. So there's some hope that there might be a cause of her canonization, but it's not going. There's no action about it really at the moment, but it will certainly be a deserving case.
We had a talk on her at our annual general meeting, I think 2 years ago, in London. So that was audio recorded, I believe. So I think that's on our YouTube channel. It's set or on the website.
Okay.
Anyway.
Must dig that up to put on our YouTube channel too. Yeah.
Yes, it would certainly be relevant to Australians, very much so actually, and we learned quite a lot about Joanna Bogle did that.
Excellent figure, and her work we know of her work in Australia, but she did important work in England at the immigrant end, and before that in southern India.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So very international sort of character, really, and links to churches in different places, actually, which is interesting. I wonder if there's any more.
Could I just make a point too about anyone that wants to follow up on the Mannix thing? Your mention of YouTube reminded me. I think the film made by Owen Hussey called Michael, they're taking them out and shooting them, or similar things. Is that the right name?
Michael, they've shot them. Yes, that's right. That's exactly, that's about his reaction to the...
Mannix comes out and speaks to the gardener on the morning of getting the news, and it's thought to encapsulate the change in his attitude, on hearing that the people in 1916 had been executed. But O'Hassey has made a film, and it includes footage from that march that you spoke of, the famous silent movie of the 1920 thing. So anyone wants a bit of background on Mannix, Tim, I think that's on YouTube. And Jim, what's the correct title again? Jim?
Michael, they've shot them. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Michael, they shot them. Yeah, I think that's
but it's quite good on the background on Mannix if you want to get it.
Yeah, there is a very well-made and well-restored film of the 1920 St. Patrick's Day parade, but I haven't never been able to find the whole thing, but it's somewhere. Yeah.
I can help you with that, Jim.
Yeah,
I can help you with that.
Yeah, please.
I've written an article on it, on the making of that film, and with references to the various versions of it and where they are to be found. There's been some restoration of it, so there are some copies of quite good quality, but I can point you in the
excellent.
right.
Yeah, please see me about it, and we'll try and make it available through ACHS as far as if possible. Yeah, please, that'd be terrific.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for an enlightening and interesting talk today. That's been fascinating. I've learned a lot. I'm sure other people will have learned a lot as well. Certainly a subject I didn't know about, and it's linked up sort of things I did know about with things I didn't know about. So it's kind of filled a few gaps there, actually, in my knowledge. So that's really interesting. And I hope the people who participate in Australia have enjoyed it as well today.
Yes, and many thanks for those in England coming to hear us as well.
Yes. Well, just to let everybody know, if you don't know about the English Catholic History Association website, it can easily be found. Just type in English Catholic History Association, it'll come up on Google or whatever you use on the internet. And also our YouTube channel has all our talks going back several years. And we have our next talk actually on Tuesday this week. So that's our next one. And we have talks every month, and we have speakers lined up until sometime next year. So there's lots of interesting things to look up if people are interested in different aspects of British Catholic history. And obviously, when we can link with other countries, we will do so. So hopefully we will do a similar thing again in the future with you.
Yes, hope that will be great. We look forward to that. I'm sure we can find some more topics of overlap between English and Australian history. As somebody mentioned, the Archbishop, the Benedictines, Paulding and Vaughan are always a good topic.
Caroline Chisholm, of course.
Caroline Chisholm again, yes.
Year as well. Congratulations on having your program filled up for next year as well.
Yeah, that's right. Brian Lucas, our president, is very dynamic about that kind of thing.
Well, we seem to have people queuing up to do talks for us, which is lucky, really. So
great. Very good.
We have our day conference in London, central London in November, first Saturday in November. And we're still finalising speakers for that, but we will have speakers. We had some excellent speakers last year at our conference, and that's in central London anyway. But I think it's a bit of a long way to come from Australia to visit us.
We can't quite manage that, I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, never mind. It will be, they're generally audio recorded. We don't have facilities to video record at those live events, but we generally audio record just simply with a mobile phone, basically. So that makes it available to other people who can't attend. But thanks again very much for the wonderful talk today, and thank you very much for all the participants, both in Britain and in Australia or anywhere else that you happen to be. I don't know if people haven't said whereabouts they are from, so I assume that most are in Australia, but I don't know. Nigel said thank you for a well-delivered talk. Our Australian friends would like to know that a couple of years ago we had a talk about Caroline Chisholm. Well, yeah, as we said already, yeah. Okay, well, thanks ever so much. I'm in Jersey. I'm going for a walk with my friends later, and then for a swim. So actually, that will be good fun. I'm looking forward to that.
In Australia, we'll be going to bed shortly.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I've got to now go and watch the test match between England and India, which is at a very exciting stage.
Okay.
Who will you support, though? That's the question.
Well, the beauty of watching a game when you are not invested in it is it's great to see the good cricket being played.
Yeah.
Not so much fun in West Indies, though, where Australia are currently playing.
Okay, well, thanks ever so much for
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.